Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I know the last time... Oh, looks like we have some echo. 1 second. Okay. Okay, so I just muted both of you, Elodie and Jennifer, just in case. It looks like someone's speaker was feeding into their microphone. If anyone has any headphones they want to grab in the meantime, that might be beneficial. But I'm going to take the opportunity to thank everyone for being here. I know this was a reschedule, internet shenanigans, but this time it looks like the internet gods are at least being nice to us, just not the speaker and microphone gods. But today I'm here to, of course, show off Jennifer Saint's latest novel, ELEKTRA. I have it right here. Of course, we have in conversation Elodie Harper. Jennifer Saint, for those who are unaware, read classical studies at King's College London, and then spent the next 13 years as an English teacher. There we go. You put the hard work in. Elodie is a reporter and presenter at ITV News Anglia. She also has worked as a journalist for the past decade. Her latest novel is The Wolf Den, the first in a new trilogy, which follows the lives of a group of young women who work in Pompeii brothel. But again, today we are here for ELEKTRA. For those of you who haven't purchased your copy and would like to, if you hit the link below, this is buy book and get signed book plates. That'll take you to our website where you can not only buy Jennifer's books, but also Elodie's. Yay! If you have any questions that you want to ask of Jennifer at any time during the event, you can go ahead and hit the link below that says ask a question, and we'll get to those halfway through the event. I'm going to go ahead and unmute and hope for the best. Okay, I think we're good for now. But
okay, I'm just about to put my headphones in, but it seems okay. Oh no,
yeah, I don't have any headphones.
Okay, no. It looks like it's actually Elodie, Jennifer. So I think what we're going to do then is when you're not talking, Elodie, we might have to mute you and then unmute you, if that makes sense. So there's no crossfeed. I'm so sorry. Okay, everyone, I'm going to go ahead and... Okay. Yes, so this might be an issue. Do you have any headphones in another room that you want to grab? No? Okay. Okay, we're gonna... Let's see here. It might just have to be you mute your speaker. Oh, it's going to be an interesting time. Okay. We're going to try it. If not, I'm more than willing to jump in and act as conversation partner. So we'll hope for the best. I'm going to go ahead and disappear for now, but I'll see everyone shortly.
We might be cursed, Elodie, on this event.
I feel like the curse of the House of Atreus is, curse of us. But however, let's see. I don't know. I don't. Is that any better? No. Okay. Well, I'm going to plow ahead and hope that they're able to fix it their end. Okay, this is very, very difficult.
Okay. I'm so sorry. But I think Elodie,
Yeah.
Okay.
Really sorry but I just think it's important Jenny
I totally understand. So I'm sorry, Elodie. I think we are gonna have to mute you. I'm so sorry you can't be part of the event, but we will trudge on, and I'll stand in. All right.
Well, thank you so much, Elodie.
Thank you, Elodie. You can watch and give us some wonderful chats in the chat. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and toggle your video. I am so sorry, Jennifer. A little curse going on in your events.
Yeah, I think so. But hopefully nothing else can go wrong. I really shouldn't say that.
Knock on wood. But yes, please go ahead and tell us about Elektra. We want to know.
Yes, okay. So Electra it's a novel set against the backdrop of the Trojan War, but it is told from the perspective of the women who are not fighting that war. They're not down on the battlefields. They're fighting their own conflicts while the war goes on around them. So it has three narrators. It's told by Clytemnestra, who is the wife of Agamemnon, who is the Greek commander who's led his forces in war against Troy. Also from the perspective of Cassandra, who is a priestess of Troy, who's been cursed by Apollo so that while she can see the future and knows the fate of her city, nobody will believe a word that she says, and there is nothing that she can do to prevent it from happening. And then finally, Elektra, who is the titular character, who's the daughter of Clytemnestra and Agamemnon, who is left at home, frozen in grief at her father's departure and desperate to put the world back to rights the way that she sees it.
So wonderful. A lot going on there. What was your inspiration behind wanting to write this?
So I really wanted to write a novel that examined the subject of female rage, because I think that so often, and today's a day that I think a lot of women are feeling particularly angry, and we certainly are over here on behalf of American women today. And so it was really important to me that this is something that women are quite often kind of socialized out of showing at their anger and their rage. It's something women are more inclined to turn inwardly against themselves. And these are three women that I was really drawn to because they don't do that in any way. That these are women who take their anger and they use it to take control of the situation around them, and they use it to try and restore justice, even when that seems... even when they have to go to very extreme lengths to do it. So that really was that was my starting point with wanting to write this novel, to take these really strong, really compelling characters from mythology and just give them a chance to tell their story.
And it's so interesting that you mentioned women in rage, because we have definitely seen quite a lot of novels in the last year, 6 months, coming out with that same topic. If only something big happened that made everyone upset. Sarcasm, but yes. Between Kelly Barnhill's When Women Are Dragons, where women get very upset and turn into dragons, to Delilah Dawson came out with, oh my goodness, her first horror novel. I'm totally blanking on the name, but yes. When did the background, the idea for this begin to culminate in your head?
So I'd written Ariadne, my first novel, and I knew that I wanted to still be bringing a voice to the women of Greek mythology, these women who who were such a central part of the stories, who performed such important functions in these myths. But I think particularly in kind of the children's versions that we get, which is often the way that we're introduced to Greek mythology, the women end up quite reduced to these sort of secondary characters, and they're pushed to the sidelines, and maybe they're just a damsel in distress or they're a villain, and they're very one-dimensional. And so I knew that I wanted to continue with actually putting these women back in the spotlight, bringing them front and center where they need to be, because so often I think that the more interesting story is not really with the heroes fighting the battles, it's actually the other stories that are going on behind that, that are affected by that are enabling that to happen, or whose lives are being destroyed or pulled in different directions because of those big conflicts that are taking the center of the stories so often. And the idea of making it these particular women, this particular time, this was a novel really born in lockdown. It was written in 2020 during the COVID pandemic. So a city under siege, because quite a lot of the action takes place in Troy, really felt informed by what was going on around, even though this is 3,000 years in the past, even though this is a completely different world in so many ways. You can always see with mythology and ancient history the ways in which we're connected, and the way that distance between us can almost shrink to nothing. And so to bring that feeling of claustrophobia and that sense of there is a danger outside the walls, and it's got this kind of shifting unknown face, and there are forces that are beyond human control really actually felt incredibly resonant at the time and incredibly relevant to the situation that all of us found ourselves in.
Especially with the idea of giving voice to someone who wouldn't normally have a voice or anyone really to care to listen. When you were studying and reading these ancient myths and stories, did you always think, well, what about this character, or what would they feel? Did you always have that mindset that I want to know beyond this flawed hero?
Well, I think it took me, I'd say in retrospect, quite an embarrassingly long time to get to that realization, because I'd always loved Greek mythology and I'd grown up with these stories, and I didn't really think to question them for quite a long time. It was when I went to university and I was studying it for my degree that actually I was introduced in a module in my second year to the Roman poet Ovid, who'd written a collection of letters. This is back in the 1st century, so still part of the ancient world and these ancient sources. But even then, he had written this collection of letters in the voices of mythological women to the men who shared their stories or had dominated their stories. And it was so interesting because Ovid had extremely questionable attitudes towards women. I'm certainly not holding him up as a paragon of feminism, and certainly in some of his other works that's extremely evident. But I really loved that in the Heroides, he turned those stories around and he showed us, he was peeling back the layers and really showing us that these were women who, like I said, in a lot of cases were angry, very justifiably so, and who, I think what really comes through in all of them is this absolute determination. Hear my side of the story, hear what it was like for me, and not just the way that you've heard this told before. And that set the wheels turning in my mind. And I realized all of these stories that I love, that I've immersed myself in, there's so much more depth to them. There are actually so many more things that that can be told, that can be learned from these. And it really comes from just looking at it from a different perspective. Sometimes that's all you need to do to shine a whole new light on something that you thought you knew so well before.
And that's a great point that, you mentioned you really didn't give it much consideration until you went to university. And I don't think a lot of people usually do give it that much thought to look beyond the male gaze or even realize there's a thing called male gaze that is directing them in these stories. So when it comes to your research about everyday life in those times, how do you go about that? Because obviously this is long time in the past and we barely get, the stories that we have now where they're lucky to even have survived this long. So what's been the research behind your stories?
Yeah, so it's quite a complicated process. And I think particularly where I might find that there's a wealth of inspiration and sources for the actual events and for the characters. And you can find so many different myths in which they feature. And that can be, there's kind of almost too much sometimes with really well-known mythological characters and stories that I'm trying to parse out what do I need, what's going to be relevant to my story. And then on the flip side, to create the actual world in which they're living, sometimes writing and I think this is so common for historical novelists in general, you'll sit down to write one simple paragraph and you will suddenly realize that's going to require 2 hours of research to work out, hang on, well, they're sitting in a room, but what are they sitting on? What are they eating? What might they be drinking? What are they wearing? And there are so many details to fill in. And there is so much, like you said, that is lost because the myths that I'm telling, so some of the parts of this novel come from the Iliad, which was being passed down in the oral tradition back in 800 BCE. But that was telling a story from their own ancient history that had taken place in the Bronze Age 500 years before they were telling this story. And then that got passed down and wasn't written down for another few hundred years after that. And so every single time that story is retold, every single time it's passed on, then something is going to change, and that's going to depend on who's telling it and why they're telling it. And so trying to find the kind of the gold dust of the reality amongst the myth and the magic and the stories and the people's agenda and the people putting their own spin and kind of taking from what's around them, it can be incredibly complicated. And all we have really is fragments from the Bronze Age. We have shattered vases, we have ruined palaces, we have kind of the foundations of ancient settlements, and you have to build a world from those little things, which can take a long time.
Yes. I don't envy you when it comes to having to do that level of research or fact checking, because especially we're living in an age where if something is, mistakenly like mixed up or, quoted or whatever, there's always going to be that at least one person that'll say, you don't know what you're talking about. Obviously, this is supposed to be a red cushion or something, because they all used red.
Yeah, I think that as well, because when you take on myth, you're taking on kind of a story or your people that readers know, and they have their own idea about it as well, that people can definitely take exception to. You used a different version, you used a different source to my favorite one. So you always want to kind of do as much justice as you can, knowing that these are, I want to treat mythology with reverence, but I also want to make it relevant to what I'm trying to say and what I'm trying to do with it.
And that's a very important thing you introduced there. Obviously, it's something that you love and you appreciate. You want to treat it with reverence, but when kind of making any sort of social commentary or revealing like, well, this is actually how it was like for women in the time, there also has to be like, I think, a level of the magnifying glass to show the imperfections. And I know there's people out there that just hate criticism, even though when it's not on themselves, it's on the things that they love. Don't show the negative side. So have you gotten any comments like that from your works?
I think if your work is out there and it's attached to the word feminism, then that is always that's always going to get some kind of
backlash, target,
I think, from some people. Yeah, it is, absolutely, and that is from people who don't like the concept at all. But it's also from people who've got a very specific idea about what feminism is to them, and yeah, and I think similarly to the fact that there are people who've got very, very kind of fixed ideas about how they want myths to be told as well. So sometimes I have, but I will say that in general, all the interactions that I have and the responses that I get and the messages that people send me are so overwhelmingly positive. And I think that it really surprised me and it really touched me that I had written a novel that was really connecting with the people who love it. They really love it. And I became a writer because I love to read so much. And certain authors and certain books have really shaped different parts of my life, and have meant so much to me along the way. So the idea that as an author you actually get to make that connection with people is such an incredible thing, and it outweighs any negativity by an enormous amount.
I love that. That's great. For all of the negative, easy ways people can bully online and share negative comments, I do like the fact that we also in times where authors like you can actually go beyond the traditional gatekeepers we used to have and tell these stories that normally wouldn't have even been picked up for publishing in the past, because again, there were certain men in power. They're like, oh, obviously no one's going to read this. Only men really read, so they're going to not want to read this.
Yeah, not read a book by a woman or a book about women. And classics as well, I think, has had a reputation for a long time as being quite an elitist subject. And that is really breaking down now. I can see that it's something that is opening up to so many people, which is also really amazing to see.
Exactly. When you do your different points of views, how do you start with beginning your character development with obviously characters that are already pre-existing? Because I imagine there also has to be a different level of research and writing for that.
Yeah, so my starting point with these three women, along with the idea that they were all very angry women, was also the fact that they've been pretty badly maligned in quite a lot of representations of them before. So Clytemnestra, who's kind of one of the first narrators in that, she dominates the early part of the novel, because actually Electra isn't born at the start of the novel, even though she ends up being the main character. And Clytemnestra is really presented in a lot of versions as this kind of archetype of a really, really terrible wife, which in fairness, I don't think it's giving any spoilers away to say that she does murder her husband. That is what she's most well known for.
Yes.
So you can kind of see where she gets the reputation. But the thing is that that she has no other recourse. She has no recourse to justice, rather, against her husband. She has very little power unless she seizes it, and the only way that she can take that power is through violent, extreme action. And she's driven entirely by maternal love for the daughter that she loses, and she's driven by this terrible, wretched grief that Agamemnon has inflicted on her. So that makes her, in so many ways, very sympathetic and very relatable. But the way that I'd seen her presented was just as this kind of vindictive, spiteful woman. And Agamemnon appears in the Odyssey from the underworld. He speaks to Odysseus, and he says, Odysseus, you're so lucky because you have a great wife who's going to be loyal to you, and I had a terrible wife who murdered me. And it's true, but also women are always pitted against each other like that, aren't they? It's always women in comparison. Like, here is a woman who is useful to men, or who is an asset to men, and here is a woman who is not, and let's compare them and let's put them up against one another. So I felt like that was how I was going to understand Clytemnestra, as a woman who is actually in so many ways very righteous and so very badly damaged by what happens to her. And similarly, Cassandra is she has this incredible insight and knowledge and clarity. She knows exactly what is going to happen, and she knows how the city could save itself. But she is dismissed as too emotional, hysterical, a madwoman. And so there's a very much a kind of gaslighting element to the way that Cassandra is treated, and the fact that after 10 years of being told that you are mad, you might start to question your own sanity. So again, she's presented as this other very kind of typical stereotype of a woman. In her case, it's that she is, that she's not to be trusted. She's not reliable. She's ruled by her emotions, and she's got no grasp on rationality, though in fact she can see more clearly than anybody else. And Electra is the way that I had encountered Electra in the tragedies, where she takes center stage, where she is the title of Sophocles and Euripides' tragedies. So she's an important character, but she feels very, very one-dimensional, in that she comes into the tragedies as a fully grown woman who is already very fixed on her path, that she hates her mother and she is obsessed with her father. And there's no exploration really that I could find of how she gets to that point, which to me is really the most interesting thing about the whole story. And that's how the novel ended up being about Electra herself, because there was this huge void, and she'd only existed, as far as I could see, to serve a purpose in this bigger story around her that people were telling. And so she just kind of pops up to take her vengeance, and then we move on and we focus on her brother and the consequences that happen to him. But actually, her story is fascinating, that she is a young woman who has been through this terrible grief, whose family has been torn apart, and who takes such an unusual course of action in how she decides that she is going to restore what the things to be the way that she believes that they ought to be. So there was a lot for me to think about how on earth Electra became Electra, which didn't seem to have been addressed, really, didn't seem to have been covered. So finding those three different voices I was looking for what is missing from the traditional portrayals of them. And really, it's seeing them as fully rounded humans. It's seeing them in the context of their female relationships, as well as the relationships that they have to the men in their lives. It's seeing them as women who have got who have got more than one dimension to them, who are, you know, fully living, breathing characters.
And that again just plays into how unfortunately women are still seen these days, you know, in a way subhuman, and it sucks so much. How did you have any struggle when you're writing the story and fleshing out the characters, that you were like just filled with this own rage from their rage, going, oh, I can't even, I have to put this down now because there's so much rage?
Well, I think that the thing is that when you decide to take on the story, and when you're the author, you can really work through those feelings. And the things that had angered me, and I heard Madeline Miller talking about writing Galatea, and that she said that was born of anger. So I really do think there's very much a feeling at the moment of this is how these women have been treated, and we're not going to stand for it. We're going to tell their story in a different way. And when it came to, I think, like the really key moment for me is that Clytemnestra and Cassandra are brought together at the end of the war, because Agamemnon brings Cassandra home as a prize from war, and it's a really horrific moment. But what I'd been told, and I remembered this from being in a classroom when I was 18 years old, was that when Clytemnestra, the wife of Agamemnon, sees his captive, she's jealous, like sexually jealous, which to me was ridiculous, because she despises Agamemnon and she spent 10 years planning how to kill Agamemnon. So the idea that she would be jealous of another woman kind of having his affections, which is a really warped way to look at it, when he's abducted a woman and he's taken her against her will and enslaved her. It was, again, like, it's that thing of pitting women against each other, seeing women in this way where they are jealous of one another. And to me, it was completely unrealistic that Clytemnestra would feel that way. But as the author, being able to take that scene, I was able to change it, and I was able to keep the events of the story, but change the motivation of the characters who are doing it. And that is really liberating, and that's a really cathartic thing to do.
It's just a wonderful way, showing how much writing can also be in its way its own therapy, not only for the writer, but then also the reader who finds it and realizes that I'm not the only one who has these thoughts, that realizes this is ridiculous, this should be different. So it just goes to show that people need to read more. Everyone, if you're upset out there, read, write, keep literacy. Don't make Fahrenheit 451 a thing, especially these days. All right. I think we're going to head to some questions, because we have some wonderful questions now from the audience. This first one I have to ask because it is very timely. Given recent news, I'd love any recommendations you have for rage books or books with reclaimed agency that are both inspiring and soothing. Great question.
Yeah, a brilliant question. Okay, so I would say that Jessie Burton's Medusa is an absolutely brilliant one. It's actually a YA novel, and it has incredible illustrations in it. And I wouldn't be put off if you don't read YA, because Jessie Burton is a magical writer, and her reclamation of Medusa's story is just one of the most beautiful that I've ever seen. She's a really beautiful writer, and the way that she tackles themes of beauty standards, of feminism, of female autonomy and empowerment, I just think is incredible. And it's a book that I would definitely, so I have sons, and I will definitely be getting them to read it when they're old enough. And if I had daughters, I would think this would be such an important book for them to read. So that one's a fantastic one. I would hugely recommend Elodie's trilogy, beginning with The Wolf Den, which is the story of women who are enslaved in the brothel in Pompeii. And you might think from hearing that, is that going to be a really depressing book or a really dark book? It's absolutely not. It is their quest for freedom. And Elodie gives them such incredible dignity and hope and humour and female friendship and all the things that you would want from that book, as well as just recreating the world of Pompeii in unbelievable detail. I mean, I talked about having to try and build the Bronze Age back out of ruins and fragments, but with Pompeii, obviously it's been so well preserved that she's brought it to such vivid, vibrant life. So definitely get that. There is a book, so I don't know if this one's out in America, but I'm going to say it anyway just in case. Great Goddesses by Nikita Gill, which is life lessons that you can learn from myth. I think that's the whole title, life lessons you can learn from myth and monsters, which is this feminist reimagining of what the Olympian gods do after the fall of Olympus, after kind of the collapse of the gods in the Greek pantheon, which is just really, really interesting, really powerful, really beautiful. And I've just received a book today, actually, which is Joan by Catherine J. Chen, which is a reimagining of Joan of Arc. I was really lucky to get to read a digital version of that. The Greek Goddesses is out. That's great. That's by Nikita Gill. So Joan by Catherine J. Chen. I didn't know anything really about Joan of Arc's life, and it is this incredible, it's a secular reimagining of her as just an incredibly driven, determined young woman who changes the course of history. So definitely good one for rage and empowerment.
I'm going to add the one book I had mentioned about Delilah Dawson. It's called The Violence. That was also born in the pandemic times, where 3 generations of women basically have to forge a new path after physical violence, and then a wave of violence hits the United States. Oh my. But yeah, that'd be a great one if you also have rage and you want to just talk about it. Great question.
That sounds great.
Oh, wonderful. Let's see here. Next question. How did writing Elektra differ from Ariadne? One story is the grander scope of the Trojan War, but both novels explore intimate and personal journeys of characters. Was writing these novels very different or similar to one another?
So it was a really different experience for me, and that might have been born out of circumstance, because I wrote Ariadne while I was still teaching. So writing that novel was kind of something that I did in the evenings when my children were going to bed, not when they were in bed, because they take a very long time about it. So I would sit outside my son's bedroom and waiting for him to go to sleep, and I'd be writing all weekends. And so I fitted it in around the job. Whereas when I came to write Elektra, the world was completely different. I wasn't teaching anymore, and as I mentioned, we were in lockdown, and that was a very strange experience, because I realized how much of writing is really done away from the book, away from the notebook or the computer screen or whatever it is that you're writing on. And I realized that not being able to go out and kind of engage with the world in the same way I felt it was really stifling. I think some people had this like burst of creativity and productivity in lockdown. I did not. So I found it much harder to write for those reasons. And I think a little bit because when you write the second novel, there is just an added pressure. When I wrote Ariadne, I told myself all the time, nobody will ever read this, so it just doesn't matter. I can do what I like with it. I can write exactly the novel I want to read. Without thinking about anybody's expectations or reactions. And when I came to write Elektra, it was quite hard to get those other voices out of my head and think, and to get, I think you always have to be writing the story you want to read and the story you want to tell. But when you start thinking, I wonder if people will like this, or, if they liked Ariadne, will they enjoy this? Or if they didn't like it, can I win them round? And that makes it very difficult. And then you realize that you are not writing. It kind of adds this layer of self-consciousness that I think makes it much harder. So it was more of a kind of slog in that sense to get to do it, but also just incredible to be writing. I had to remind myself all the time, it's so incredible that I am writing the second novel and that I do know people are going to read it. So I'm I'm really glad that it's had such a good reception from people. So thank you.
No, thank you. Good question there. What made you choose these specific 3 women to tell the story? Was there a 4th woman you considered bringing in, or did you always know it was going to be the 3?
So I always knew it was going to be the 3. And a lot of people kind of say, well, why didn't I give Helen her voice? Because Helen's a major female character and I don't give her a narrative voice. And I think it could have got a little bit out of hand if I had, just to introduce another narrative voice. So I had to think really carefully about, well, whose story do I want to tell and why? And because Clytemnestra and Helen are sisters, and they are twin sisters, except that Helen is the daughter of Zeus and Clytemnestra is the daughter of a mortal man. So although they're twins, there's this kind of inequality baked in right from the start about their status. And that's only enhanced by the fact that Helen then grows up to be legendarily this most beautiful woman in the world, and everybody competes to marry her. And so I felt that if I had Helen's perspective, then that would detract a little bit from Clytemnestra's story, that actually I really wanted Clytemnestra to have the spotlight and not Helen. And I wanted to explore her conflict with her daughter Electra. That was a relationship I was really interested in. And I thought it would be so interesting to see that conflict, a mother-daughter conflict from both sides. So that was then meant that obviously Electra needed to be a character. And because the action moves to Troy, because there is a 10-year war, I needed to have a Trojan perspective as well. And I wanted it to be Cassandra because of that very unique plight that she's in. And I thought the fact that you could see the events of the war play out from the eyes of somebody who knows the inevitability of the city's annihilation just puts you in such a more interesting position than the other characters that I would love to hear from Troy would be perhaps somebody like Andromache, the wife of Hector. But her story just didn't kind of, it didn't, I thought there was such a unique opportunity with Cassandra to explore something very different. So there could have been, I think there always will be, when I'm writing a novel, kind of 3 or 4 other novels that I could have written that I didn't. And there's always that temptation to think, can I explore somebody else's story? So I really had to remind myself of the kind of focus of this book and what it is that brings these 3 women in particular together, how their experiences intersect with each other, that makes them part of one whole story.
And it leaves the possibilities in the future if you wanted to explore those other ones. For sure.
Yeah, I could go back, yeah.
Do you have a favorite part or a fun fact of these myths that you weren't able to fit into the story? I like that one.
Oh, that is a good one. So there was definitely a lot with Ariadne. There's so many different versions of her myth that was a lot more difficult. There were things I really had to leave out, especially around the character of Dionysus. With Electra, I can't think of anything in particular that I left out because the story is a little bit more well established, I think, when it comes to this particular kind of saga of events. I think I was very fascinated by the curse that's on Agamemnon's family. The whole novel is kind of overshadowed by the fact that he comes from a family where generation upon generation have committed these terrible crimes against each other, and the gods have punished them in various inventive and horrific ways. And although I tell those stories in the novel, I think I would quite like to have gone further into them. There wasn't the space and it wasn't their story, but they're so lurid and they're so gruesome and they're so fascinating, that I kind of wanted to take us into Tartarus, into the underworld, and see the suffering that's being inflicted on Agamemnon's ancestors. But again, I think that's just a very different kind of novel, so we didn't go there.
Speaking of Agamemnon, did you find it difficult to write Electra's sympathetic point of view for Agamemnon?
Yes, definitely. So I think that Agamemnon, so whereas in Ariadne we had Theseus, who I quite enjoyed exposing as being, you know, less than heroic and awful in so many ways. With Agamemnon, nobody had a positive opinion of Agamemnon. So I wasn't kind of knocking down any kind of preconceptions about Agamemnon being a great hero or a great guy in any way, because he just seems to have been pretty much universally despised, and for the right reasons, because he was awful to everyone. He's, you know, in the Iliad, he's locked in this petty squabble with Achilles over this poor woman that they've enslaved, and so he's not respected by the other soldiers. He's absolutely hated by his wife. He makes terrible decisions all the time. And so to write the perspective of this one person in the whole canon of Greek mythology who thinks positively about Agamemnon, it was really, really difficult to work out why she would. And that, as I talked about, I kind of had to go back and create Electra's backstory and create her childhood and who she would have been. And to me, it made sense that Agamemnon left when she was a child, and he left after the death of her sister and the subsequent absolute disintegration of her mother into grief. And so for Electra, as a young child, her conviction that if only her father would come home, her life would be happy again was the only way that really she would make sense to me. That she is a child who's been deeply traumatized and who can't possibly understand the kind of man that her father really is at such a young age. And because he's absent for so long, and she has so many clashes with her mother because they are very similar personalities, and that can sometimes lead to great conflict, especially in your teenage years, that you do mythologize, I think, and idealize the parent who is not there, and imagine all the ways in which they would be the perfect parent, and the person who is there actually in front of you, you can criticize and you can pull down and you can find fault with. But the person who isn't there is going to stay saintly and is going to stay perfect and is going to stay this incredible hero of your imagination. So Agamemnon is completely constructed by Electra, and I think that's why she fixes so much of her hopes upon him, because she never has to confront the reality of who he really is.
Wow, there's a lot of thought that went into that. Wonderful. Both Elektra and Ariadne show human relationship with gods and the devastating effects of those relationships. What was writing those relationships like?
So it's one of the things that I love about Greek mythology is the fact that you have the gods interacting with human beings, that you and it's just another really exciting and interesting dimension to put into a novel. The fact that these gods can walk among them, and that there is that tension then to manage of to what extent are people being controlled and kind of having their strings pulled like puppets, and to what extent do people have free will and the chance to make their own decisions, their own mistakes, their own choices. So I always think that just adds a richness to the novels, and is something that gives you a real freedom as a writer to write these characters who have unlimited power and really no moral restraint of any kind, and no consequences to their actions. It just adds, it really raises the stakes, I think, in a way that can be terrifying or it can be really exciting. But it definitely is something that I always that makes writing these stories so interesting to me in so many ways.
See, everyone that's watching this right now, I want you all to realize that a lot of work goes into making this. From everything you've just heard, that's a lot of prep work and writing and thought process that goes into this. So writing is not easy, but please go ahead and try it if you wish. We have one last question. Is there a dream character from Greek mythology that you would love to write about?
Well, I guess I can tell you that I am writing my third novel at the moment, and it's a character who I've been desperate to write about for a really long time. And so she is completely unique in Greek myth as being the only woman who joined the Argonauts. Her name is Atalanta, and she is an incredibly fearless, wild, brave heroine of mythology, and her story is just simply so much fun, and I'm so excited to be able to share it with everybody next year.
Wonderful. Yay. And we need more strong female characters. Yes, I'm going to say it forever. Oh my goodness. Oh, thank you so much. I'm sorry, Elodie, that we couldn't have you be conversation partner, but Jennifer, I am thankful that this gave me the opportunity to talk to you, because this has been a wonderful experience. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, and thanks so much for rescheduling after the first one. It didn't happen at all. I really, really appreciate it, and thanks to anyone who came back and gave me another chance.
We make it work. That's what we do here. If you not have yet gotten your own copy of Elektra, or want to get any of Jennifer's other books, or get Elodie's The Wolf Den, click the link below. They'll take you to our website where you can purchase them. We ship worldwide across the country, obviously, and you can also even do in-store pickup if you wish. For everyone watching this in the future, thank you for also tuning in. I hope everyone has a great day. Have a great night, Jennifer. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone. Bye.